Welcome back to Court TV Live. We have a verdict in the state of Georgia. It's the case against Matthew Lanz. It was a bench trial. We watched it play out a good part of the week this week. And again, so the judge took some time to review all of the evidence. She sat through the entire trial and now has made the decision after an hour and a half.
Some of the most interesting parts of the trial were listening to Lanz give the police interview. Now, that's something his defense counsel did not want to come in, but we'll go ahead and bring in our guest who's joining us now, Wendy Patrick. But Wendy, we can talk about that. Defense counsel did not want those police interviews to come in because he was saying, we heard Lanz say in those interviews, I'm tired, I want to go home, I do want to talk with my attorney about being a witness, but he wasn't really clear on invoking his rights, saying, I no longer want to talk, I need an attorney.
Yeah, that is one of the trickiest parts of trying to analyze a suspect interview is we really don't know, without actually being there, feeling the energy in the room. The closest we get is some of these videotaped interviews to really decide, is someone just equivocating and explaining that they're uncomfortable, or is it an affirmative attempt to end the interrogation or to end the questioning? That is the subject of so much litigation before the trial. And you're right, whatever the answer ends up being legally, it is still difficult for a defense attorney to make that decision as to whether or not to fight to keep something like that out of court. Because if interviews come in, the defendant doesn't need to take the stand. So sometimes it's a very complicated question they have to tackle pre-trial.
Yeah, this is a live look inside the courtroom. Typically, when you have a jury, it takes some time to get everybody assembled, interested parties. Likely, it'll be a little quicker here that they're giving interested parties, family, etc., a chance to make their way to the courtroom. But clearly, this wasn't a scenario. You had closing arguments today. People probably didn't go too far. So I say that, Wendy, we might cut you off mid-sentence if once we see that camera move and we go.
That's okay.
Go into the to the verdict. This is a heartbreaker. The couple that was murdered just bought this house. They had a 2-year-old. The 2-year-old was by himself. Ended up being found covered in his parents' blood and clutching his father's glasses when he was found. And this defendant, Matthew, didn't have a connection to the family. He had lived across. They had just moved in. His family lived sort of in the backyard. It has sad, sad, sad written all over it from the defendant's standpoint. His family, you heard from his mom and dad. I mean, mental illness is part of the equation here, Wendy. It just absolutely is.
It's right. And Ted, the facts of this case were so heartbreaking to read. And that's, coming from a 30-year prosecutor. Can you imagine what it's like for a jury to have to hear these facts without any type of experience, most of them, in even learning about a murder like this? And then you put on top of that the reality that they're told by the judge they're not allowed to consider some of the more heartbreaking, tear-jerking aspects of the case. They just have to use the cold hard facts and decide whether or not those elements have been met. That is virtually impossible as a human being, but legally they have to do it in order to reach a verdict. And afterwards, I wouldn't be surprised if they want some sort of trauma counseling, which is something courts across the nation are looking into for our brave men and women that sit on juries and have to be exposed to facts like this.
Well,
so it's
Wendy,
a huge issue.
One of the factors here is there is no jury. This is a bench trial. For that reason,
yeah.
I think
that's right.
That was a defense strategy.
Right, exactly.
We don't need citizens hearing this. It is just over the top.
I remember.
Yeah.
I remember this now. Yeah, no, I remember this now. And that's one of the things that, the trauma that is involved in listening to these facts. So at the very least, you do have a judicial officer that I hate to say has probably heard a lot of this before, but it's just one of those, there's no winners. It's just traumatic for everybody involved. And I would even say the court staff that had to listen to some of what came out in the courtroom. So I suppose we shouldn't be surprised that we're going to hear a decision shortly. And I think we probably know what it is.
Yeah, I would think that we do. During the police interview, Wendy, Lanz said, he said, I didn't go into the house. They kept asking him. The police kept asking him. He said he saw the lights flickering, but he never went in the house. It had a big fence. But the way the prosecutor was framing this as him and his brother, or at least his brother, had some maybe harassing interactions with the people who lived in the home prior. And even during that interview, we heard police asking Lance about that. Maybe did he get confused, thinking that it was the same people that had been supposedly harassing his brother? But he was clear, I never went into that house.
You know, Ted mentioned mental illness, and I have to say that almost everything that was recited in that interview, we have to kind of look at it through the lens of, is it paranoid delusion? Is it, is he mistaken? It is so challenging as legal practitioners to sort of translate what a defendant is saying through the lens of any kind of mental illness, especially if it's the kind that, as is the case here, that might have some kind of a break with reality. And then the question becomes, how does that impact the necessity of proving intent? That has got to be one of the most difficult parts of a murder case, trying to figure out, well, what is it? Is it a manslaughter? Is it a first degree, second degree? Does mental illness cloud the ability to form the requisite intent that matches the charges? Even for a seasoned judicial officer, that requires some extended analysis, probably reading a lot of case law on the bench notes to try to figure out how do the mental illness issues in the case before the court impact what the prosecutor has to prove. So sometimes you don't want a jury in a case this complicated. You want somebody that is familiar, that's experienced, that's competent in trying to weave their way through how they would come up with a decision in a case like this, where you do have some of those issues complicating the question of intent as well as the facts leading up to the killing.
Again, if you're just joining us, we're waiting on a verdict from a judge who sat and listened to the testimony in the case against Matthew Lanz. Here's Lanz in that police interview saying, I never went in the house.
Why would I kill my neighbors?
Why would you go into someone's house and stab a cop?
Because I didn't intend to do that. With all due respect.
Maybe you didn't intend to murder them, but you did.
Yeah, and Wendy, another thing that we heard throughout this case from defense counsel was that Matthew was having these thoughts that he was being set up by the CIA, by the FBI. So that was something we did hear about, at least in the openings. Defense counsel was making that very clear and a good point to the judge. That's what he was talking about.
That's right. And, as you both know, I started my career as a deputy public defender, and it would be a great day to have just a judge sitting in a case like this, as we have here, because of the ability to separate some of what the defendant says before the case, and especially right after the crime, from the elements that the prosecutor has to prove. And it's a mixed bag, because it's not the case that if somebody is found incompetent in other cases by reason of mental illness or defect or whatever we want to call it in a particular case, doesn't mean they're going to be let right back out on the street. And so that's one of the things that makes it even more challenging. Not only does it challenge the facts, but then after the conviction, if that's the result here, after the finding, it complicates what happens next. So it's very difficult, and you would want somebody that's familiar with some of these issues as a baseline, because as you mentioned, everything has to be viewed through that lens and trying to figure out, why did the defendant do it? How did he do it? And then what do we do with him now?
The prosecution team just arrived, apparently. According to our team, you see the security there in the courtroom. Whenever a verdict is announced, of course, security increases exponentially because of the emotions inherently surrounded by the life-changing decision that we're about to watch together. There was one of the most heartbreaking moments, Wendy, of this case was the testimony from the victims. The male. Oh, okay. Everybody's standing, so the judge is taking the bench. As soon as we get audio, we will jump in there, I believe. Oh, no, someone was just standing to be courteous to let the officer in there. But here we go. There's the camera moving. Here comes the judge.
Really close to the procedural.
We saw a defendant make his way into the courtroom there. The attorneys had wanted to approach the judge.
From two different angles. One was delayed because of it's a Zoom feed. That's why it looked a little weird. You saw him twice. They're at sidebar, yes, though. So right now the parties are up at the bench before this verdict is read aloud. But there you see the defendant really looking the way he has through this entire trial.
He's really been emotionless, throughout the trial. He had that one little outburst, I believe, when he was watching the police interview. He said something in court as that was playing, but it was just really short. That was really the only movement I saw from him throughout this case.
Yeah. But he's going to find out in just a few minutes. And, you know, some speculation here is his lawyer is very seasoned, and this entire bench trial may be in part a play for the next process, the appellate process. You know, getting a nice clean record on with no jury involved. It's a faster track. It's a little bit different proceeding. Nobody's playing to a jury, and you know, this is not going to be over after this, because I think it's pretty much everybody thinks he's going to be found guilty.
The top charge is malice murder.
And then the appellate process will kick in, and it'll be, the motivation from the family is the mental health needs for him. And maybe he gets that in prison, assuming he's found guilty.
Wendy, we heard from the parents when police were interviewing them, and at first they appeared shocked at some matters that the police were expressing to them, but then as the interview went on and on, we heard the parents say some things like, well, he really had these thoughts and delusions, and we knew he had a gun, and we asked him for the gun. The father wanted to take the gun, or did eventually take the gun away from him. Just weigh in here as we wait a little bit to hear what the they might be coming back, Wendy, so just hang on.
Good afternoon. Again, I am Judge Sonja Brown, the presiding judge for the trial of the state of Georgia versus Matthew Scott Lanz, 22-900-922. We are present here in the open courtroom. President of the court, the clerk, the court reporter, Mr. Lanz. He's represented by Attorney Jimmy Berry, and the state is represented by Assistant District Attorneys Green and Horowitz. In the Superior Court of Cobb County, state of Georgia, the state of Georgia versus Matthew Scott Lanz, defendant, criminal action file number 22-900-922. Non-jury judgment after bench trial. Defendant having waived his right to trial by jury, the parties having consented to a bench trial before the court, and the bench trial having commenced at November 17th, 2025 at 9 a.m. Now, therefore, after considering the evidence admitted during the bench trial, the parties' arguments, and the applicable law, the court finds as follows. As to count 1, malice murder, the court finds the defendant, Matthew Scott Lanz, guilty. As to count 2, malice murder, the court finds the defendant, Matthew Scott Lanz, guilty. As to count 3, felony murder, the court finds the defendant, Matthew Scott Lanz, guilty. As to count 4, felony murder, the court finds the defendant, Matthew Scott Lanz, guilty. As to count 5, felony murder, the court finds the defendant, Matthew Scott Lanz, guilty. As to count 6, felony murder, the court finds the defendant, Matthew Scott Lanz, guilty. As to count 7, home invasion, the court finds the defendant, Matthew Scott Lanz, guilty. As to count 8, aggravated assault, the court finds the defendant, Matthew Scott Lanz, guilty. As to count 9, aggravated assault, the court finds the defendant, Matthew Scott Lanz, guilty. As to count 10, possession of firearm during commission of a felony, the court finds the defendant, Matthew Scott Lanz, guilty. As to count 11, possession of firearm during commission of a felony, the court finds the defendant, Matthew Scott Lanz, guilty. As to count 12, cruelty to children in the second degree, The court finds the defendant, Matthew Scott Lanz, guilty. As to count 13, tampering with evidence, the court finds the defendant, Matthew Scott Lanz, guilty. This 20th day of November 2025, signed and affixed with my signature, Judge Sonja and Brown. Would you all like to take a look at the form?
No, Your Honor.
Right, Madam Clerk, if you would please enter this non-jury judgment after bench trial into the record of the court. Right, I will hear from the state of the defense regarding sentencing.
Your Honor, we have talked, I know that the state has quite a large number of people that want to speak. I think it probably would be wise to start that in the morning. So we can get through with it tomorrow.
Stay.
We don't have any objection to that. Thank you, Your Honor.
All right, so we will stand in recess until 10 a.m. tomorrow morning, in which time both the state and the defense will have an opportunity to present arguments and any statements from any victim impact statements or statements in mitigation on behalf of Mr. Lanz.
Thank you, Judge.
Right, we'll stand in recess until 10 a.m. Oh, 1 minute, please. Court is still in session.
Your Honor, just for the record, and I apologize for not putting this on the record prior, but as for your deliberations, the following exhibits were not provided to Your Honor. That was State's Exhibit 670, an ATF crime log report, State's 671, another ATF lab report, State's 917, which was the Google search history, State's 607, which was the ZevTech OZ9 of the defendant's gun. State's Exhibit 468 was not an exhibit. It was never tendered, it wasn't missed, it just was never, that number was never used. And then finally, of course, we did not provide Your Honor with Master Drive A, which contains State's Exhibits 5, 7, 460, 462, 463, 464, 465, 466, 467, 469, 470, 471, 472, 473, 474, 481, 685, and 686. Thank you.
We agree with that, Judge.
Okay. Right, and all the evidence has been brought and placed back in court.
Thank you so much.
Right, we'll stand in recess until 10 a.m. tomorrow morning.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Dennis, you do have a...
Looks like he was wiping away some tears there, Ted. But yeah, we heard the family clapping inside the courtroom. The victims in this case, Justin and Amber Hicks, young couple. They had the little 2-year-old boy who, of course, was unharmed. But as you can see, Matthew Lanz guilty on all charges.
Family, a bit celebratory, others soulful, some tears on that side as well. A huge amount of emotion, and that a packed courtroom showing the effect of these two murders and the ripple effect of it. They'll never get over it, these family members and that little boy now in the care of that family, but without his parents forever. So let's get a break. When we come back, we'll react to the guilty verdict. Matthew Lanz guilty on all 13 charges against him.
Tonight on Closing Arguments, will unrelated charges against Melanie Buzzard's mother tell us more about this little girl's disappearance? We have key takeaways from today's big hearing.
Closing Arguments with Vinnie Politan, tonight at 8/7 Central, only on Court TV.
The disappearance of Anna Walsh.
Her husband now charged with her murder.
All eyes on this accused killer.
The disappearance of Anna Walsh murder trial. Live coverage begins December 1st on Court TV.
Oregon.
Welcome back to Court TV Live. We just watched the verdict being handed down by a judge in the state of Georgia. The defendant, Matthew Lanz, found guilty on all 13 of the counts against him for the murders of Justin and Amber Hicks.
Still with us, trial attorney Wendy Patrick. Wendy, your reaction to this verdict, as we have been talking about, not really a surprise, coming back on that top count of malice murder, as well as all the other charges.
You know, not really a surprise, but we never want to take it for granted when there are mental issues involved, and you don't even know what they are. You don't even need a formal diagnosis to be able to tell that something's not right. There's some kind of a break with reality, or there's just an absolute lack of emotion like you saw, at least during most of the reading of that verdict. I mean, he barely blinked for a lot of it until the very end, as you noted, that there appeared to have been some emotion. But I'm not surprised when considering the strength of the evidence that the verdicts were exactly what they were. And you had a judge that was able to separate some of the emotion, no doubt involved in listening to some of that testimony and just envisioning and no doubt being triggered by a lot of what was involved, especially when you have that toddler that was at the scene. So I'm not surprised, but it's also, there's really no winners in a case like this. You saw the eruption in the courtroom and the applause, and justice was served for sure, but it doesn't bring back the victims. It brings them justice, and I think that's what part of that celebration was about. But the healing process is going to go on for years.
Yes, it will. Let's go ahead and replay that verdict for our viewers right now.
In the Superior Court of Cobb County, state of Georgia, the state of Georgia versus Matthew Scott Lanz, defendant, criminal action file number 229-00922, non-jury judgment after bench trial. Defendant having waived his right to trial by jury, the parties having consented to a bench trial before the court, and the bench trial having commenced at November 17th, 2025 at 9 a.m. Now, therefore, after considering the evidence admitted during the bench trial, the parties' arguments, and the applicable law, the court finds as follows. As to count 1, malice murder, the court finds the defendant, Matthew Scott Lanz, guilty. As to count 2, malice murder, the court finds the defendant, Matthew Scott Lanz, guilty. As to count 3, felony murder, the court finds the defendant, Matthew Scott Lanz, guilty.
And it went on and on. And again, Wendy, the cheering in the courtroom seemed to trigger his tears, his emotion. He was very stoic during the reading, and then when the family that packed the courtroom, that side of the courtroom, reacted, I think he reacted. And it just adds another layer of complexity to this whole thing.
It really does add another layer of complexity, because it's one thing when you have some defendants that just appear to just be emotionless regardless of what they're accused of doing, or in many cases what they admit to doing. It's quite another when you have somebody like you have here who does appear to be capable of expressing emotion and even to be horrified by his own actions. And I think we saw some of that when you think through what he said to the police and the way he responded. So it's just complicated. And, you know, it's good that you've got a judge that's able to separate some of that, because that's, again, one of the things that is challenged by mental health issues is, does it absolve somebody of liability? Does it mean they couldn't make good decisions? They couldn't form premeditation? Or does it simply mean it's one of the many factors to be considered in deciding whether the elements have been met? And that appears to have been the case today.
Wendy, tomorrow we're going to have the sentencing. We have it down at the bottom of the screen. Sentencing hearing scheduled for tomorrow at 10 a.m. The state has said that they are going to bring forth a number of people who are going to speak. It's going to be, I can imagine, just extremely emotional. When they testified during the trial, it was hard to listen to. And so what do you think, though, we will hear or see from defense counsel?
Many times in cases like this, the kinds of circumstances and mitigation that'll be presented on behalf of the defendant are going to focus on the difficulty that he may have had, whether it's growing up, whether it's as a result of the mental issues that he has. And it's also difficult because when you're thinking through what's a fair sentence given the defendant's actions, you have to weigh that against what no doubt all the prosecution witnesses are going to be talking about, which will probably be more showing more intentionality to his actions as the defense witnesses would have you believe, if they put on any. And that's why sentencings in cases like this are the most important part of the case. There are often not an enormous amount of issues regarding guilt with fact patterns like this. Instead, we typically look at them and say, this is a sentencing case. We've been saying that forever in criminal courtrooms. When you have mental issues like this that really complicate what's the case going to be worth, and that's what we hear tomorrow.
Yeah, and you know, what do you do with a young man like this who, according to his parents, had exhibited signs of delusions, seeing things that weren't there, as his father said, and has some issues. And I'm sure for that side, for his family, for his attorney, who's very seasoned, it'll be about where he's placed and will he receive the care that he needs in terms of medication or what have you in the state penitentiary. And states have morphed, you know, into quasi mental health institutions over the past, you know, several decades because people like that are filling their cells. And it's a complicated issue, but I'm sure that that's really number one, because they know what he did. They know that what he did is, he can't walk the streets. No. But that'll likely be the theme there. We'll see.